This week on Christian World News, Russian troops are holding military exercises on Ukraine's northern border, while U.S. President Biden urges Americans to leave the country. We take you inside Ukraine for the latest updates. Plus, humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Millions are on the brink of starvation. Some are taking desperate actions just to survive. And from megachurch to mini church. As COVID changes the way we worship, we're seeing a new trend towards smaller and more intimate congregations. And welcome to Christian World News, everyone. I'm Wendy Griffith. We begin with the crisis in Ukraine. Russia is carrying out 10 days of military drills in neighboring Belarus. The Russian Defense Ministry released this video of S-400 missile systems arriving in the country. The Kremlin has also moved troops from Siberia and the Far East for these drills, adding to the 100,000 or more Russian troops already in the area. Meanwhile, President Biden has approved a plan for American troops in Poland to help thousands of U.S. citizens get out of Ukraine if Russia invades. Some critics charge the administration is working to avoid a repeat of the chaotic pullout from Afghanistan.
What people should understand is that the United States does not typically do mass evacuations. Of course, the situation in Afghanistan was unique for many reasons, including that it was the end of a 20-year war. We were bringing a war to an end. We were not trying to prevent a war, as we are certainly in this case. There are a range of means that individuals and Americans can depart from Ukraine, and we've been encouraging them to do exactly that.
CBN senior international correspondent and my co-anchor of Christian World News, George Thomas, is in Ukraine. George, tell us now what's going on inside the country. I know you just landed not too long ago.
You walk the streets of Kyiv and, you'd be absolutely shocked to realize how normal things are in the capital city and not even realize that you have probably more than 130,000 Russian soldiers who have practically surrounded two-thirds of the country. But as I was talking to a number of folks here this morning as I arrived, they said, listen, George, you guys just showed up on the scene the last 2-3 weeks, last 2 months or so. We've been living in a state of war for the last 8 years, since 2014, specifically in the eastern part of the country, in the provinces of Luhansk and Donbass. So they say, listen, we're used to this. But what is absolutely different than what was happening in 2014, Wendy, is that you have this massive deployment of not just troops, but as you mentioned, missiles and other very heavy equipment all along Ukraine's northern, south, and southeastern borders. So it's a very, very different dynamic. The president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, has really this last month and a half really taken a very calm and measured approach, telling people not to panic, that there is dialogue going on behind the scenes, and that peace is a possibility, that he did not want to escalate things. So clearly it's a very different environment and feeling here in the capital.
Yeah, well, there seems like there's some panic in Washington because the U.S. is telling citizens to leave Ukraine, American citizens. Is there a rush to get out of the country?
Yeah, I spoke in the last 24 hours since the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine released this alert for telling Americans not to come into the country, and those who are in the country, like myself, to get out. But those that I've spoken to are still taking a wait-and-see approach. What was alarming was President Biden's interview to NBC News that said that if the war did escalate, did happen, that the U.S. would not bring in troops to rescue Americans. I mean, that's incredible. When was the last time we would leave American citizens in a country not to be able to rescue them? So that's very, very disconcerting for those that I've spoken to. But when I came into the airport, when I came to the country, in fact, the plane I took in from Amsterdam was jam-packed and the airport was full. So again, this sort of sense of calm, but we don't know if it's the calm before the storm.
Absolutely. Well, Orthodox Christianity is the dominant religion in both Ukraine and Russia. How has this crisis caused a rift between believers in these two countries.
Yeah, I mean, historically, the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church have been at loggerheads, and primarily because the Ukrainian Orthodox look at the Russian Orthodox and say, listen, you guys are more than just, practicing your orthodoxy, but you are so tied to the Russian government. And as you know, Vladimir Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church are very, very close. And Ukrainian Orthodox Christians are very, very they feel skittish about that kind of a relationship. In the meantime, I was speaking to evangelical pastors in the last 48 hours who are taking this moment of crisis. They've been planning behind the scenes, in fact, since early spring of last year, how to mobilize, how to pray, how to rescue people outside of potential war zones. Keep in mind, for example, pastors in the eastern part of the country over the last 8 years, they've been dealing with this almost every single day. So they have a sort of a plan in place in case things erupt even more dramatically, especially in the eastern part of the country. And keep in mind, the church, the evangelical church today in Ukraine is exploding. It is flourishing. 30 years of freedom since the fall of the Soviet Union. The church is on fire. Thousands of people are coming to the Lord, and it's a really incredible time. But there is also a window that people are concerned about, that if Russia does invade, it would dramatically change the spiritual landscape of this country.
And what about these rumors that we're hearing about Putin waiting until the Beijing Olympics are over to invade? Is there any truth to that?
Well, there is, because, 8 years ago on February 20th, I was actually in Crimea when Russia annexed Crimea. The Olympic Games, the ceremony closes on February 20th, and the Russian-Belarus military exercises also end on February 20th. So that's definitely a date to keep an eye on.
George, we're praying for everybody in Ukraine, and we're especially praying for you to stay safe, my friend. Great reporting as always. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Well, coming up, millions in Afghanistan are on the brink of starvation. The suffering made worse as some take drastic action just to survive. Welcome back to Christian World News. Iran could be weeks away from developing a nuclear bomb, and the Islamic regime has already unveiled new long-range missiles that it claims can reach Israel. Now, U.S. officials say it is crunch time to get a nuclear deal done in Vienna. But critics say the White House is making risky concessions.
I think the Biden administration is rushing and building this case for an urgent need for a deal off of a year of premature concessions, which you saw through indirect sanctions relief, lack of enforced sanctions, turning a blind eye to illicit Iranian oil exports throughout 2021, as well as having no clear plan to push back on the Islamic Republic in the Middle East.
Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said lifting sanctions will result in billions of dollars flooding into Iran, resulting in more terror attacks against Israel and U.S. forces in that region. Well, in neighboring Afghanistan, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding since the U.S. withdrawal in August. As starvation overtakes the country, more than 23 million people are in dire need of assistance, the United Nations says. David Miliband of the International Rescue Committee testified to the U.S. Congress that things are desperate. Girls are being sold into marriage, and people are selling their own organs to get money for food.
6 months ago, Afghanistan was a poor country, a very poor country. As Senator Young has rightly pointed out, the climate crisis, the COVID crisis added to that. However, today, Afghanistan is a starving country, not just a poor country. The reason, I'm very sorry to report, the proximate cause of this starvation crisis is the international economic policy which has been adopted since August.
President Biden recently released $7 billion of Afghanistan's assets held in U.S. banks, half of that money going to compensate victims of the September 11th attacks. The other half will fund humanitarian relief in Afghanistan. Jeremy Barker is Senior Program Officer and Director of the Middle East Action Team at the Religious Freedom Institute. Recently, he spoke with our John Jessup on CBN's Faith Nation about the growing crisis in Afghanistan and its impact on the people and the church.
Jeremy, what's the situation like now on the ground for ordinary Afghans? the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is truly mind-boggling. More than half the country facing humanitarian need. There's estimates that up to 1 million Afghan children could die from starvation. And this is compounded by massive security concerns. We have the Taliban trying to figure out how to govern a country with its own competing factions. And then you have terrorist groups like ISIS that view this as an opportunity for them to gain ground. And so between those governance and those security concerns, this is only magnifying the humanitarian need. And it's a country that's going through its worst drought in nearly 30 years. So the impact for the average Afghan is really massive.
What you're describing is suffering upon suffering. Jeremy, as you well know, this year's Open Doors World Watch List rated Afghanistan as the worst place to be a Christian, knocking off North Korea, which had held that #1 slot for decades. Jeremy, for context, can you help set the stage? Can you give us a sense of how many Christians, Afghan Christians there are, and what dangers do they face under Taliban rule?
Prior to the U.S. withdrawal, we had seen the Afghan church growing. There's variations of those numbers, but tens of thousands of Afghan Christians. Many of them have now been forced to flee the country, but others that have gone underground some that had the opportunity to leave and were committed to staying and being a part of their country. And yet we know that there's Christians who are being actively hunted down and targeted. We know those who've been arrested if Christian material have been found in their homes or on electronic devices, some cases even turned over by their family. So you mentioned the situation for women is particularly concerning for all women, and especially those from religious minorities, Christian converts in particular. So you have this tension of active hunting, and yet Afghan Christians who have a compelling desire to stay there and to love their neighbors, even at great risk to themselves.
If you would like to learn more about how to pray for the church in Afghanistan, just visit the website on your screen, cbnnews.com. Stay with us. Well, coming up, how COVID has changed the way Christians do church. We'll take a look at the rise of the mini church trend right after this. Welcome back to Christian World News. Well, for decades, the number of mega churches in America have been on the rise. Now that's changing. COVID has transformed the way Christians worship, including the size of our congregations, resulting in what's known as the mini church trend. Take a look. And crown him Lord of all. It's Sunday morning at Blackwater Baptist Church in Virginia Beach, a country church that dates back to 1774. Although small to begin with, the pandemic has driven down the number of people in the pews.
I think we had about 100, 110 coming, and now I think today there was like 68, 70, so somewhere around 30%, maybe a little more.
Senior Pastor Lynn Hardaway says they felt the need for quick changes to keep the church going.
We did some outside services, parking lot services. They've changed the way they do communion, the way they take offerings, no more passing things between people.
Praise in the likeness of his resurrection. Congratulations.
Last summer, they even borrowed a circular horse trough for outdoor baptisms, held Bible studies under the trees, featured an outdoor movie night, and like most churches, turned to live streaming services for those not attending in person.
Our folks learned how to do Facebook and how to do social media. I was very proud, especially of the elderly people, that they took on the challenge.
Today, about 380,000 churches dot America's landscape. Of that number, only some 1,500 are considered megachurches that average 2,000 or more each weekend. The majority, however, are about the size of Blackwater Baptist or smaller. And according to a Faith Communities Today study, half of U.S. congregations have 65 people or fewer.
So that lets you know that God's people prefer, by and large, smaller settings.
Let God break into your life so you can have part of his glory. Let God shake. Please stand up on your feet. Hallelujah.
Pastor Moses Asamoah of Living Destiny, a small church in Norfolk, Virginia, agrees the isolation caused by COVID is creating a hunger for intimacy.
Somebody actually joined us because they were looking for that place where they could actually walk with their pastor and know the people in the congregation. So the mega church has its place, but there's a desire to be actually hands-on.
Unfortunately, the pandemic has caused many smaller churches to close their doors, while others are barely clinging to life. That's not the case, though, at Living Destiny. Pastor Asamoah says despite moving mainly to online services, especially during 2020, they have thrived and even bought a new building.
We actually saved more money during COVID than ever before. I mean, it's amazing because salaries did not change, the rent did not change. So maybe we saved a few dollars on water and electricity because people were not in the building that much. But the main bills of the church remained the same. And so to be able to save that much was just God.
Pastor Asamoah believes prayer led to their success.
The amazing thing is that our theme for the year 2020 was our year of the secret place, based on Psalm 91. And so in March, when it hit, it was like, this makes sense. This is our year to just abide in God's presence. And so the church did well. I mean, because we stood upon the word of God, right? Because God had prepared us up until that time.
Pastor Asamoah's wife, Delali, says the church's women's ministry also grew stronger.
When it went on Zoom, this is where the young people thrive. They love the technology. What happened was I was able to merge the women's ministry with the young adult ladies, and it was amazing.
No matter what the devil does, no matter what assaults he makes on the church, God always wins.
In addition to pastoring Blackwater Baptist, Lynn Hardaway oversees nearly 100 mostly small churches as part of the Bridge Network. He knows how challenging the pandemic has been.
Pastors are struggling emotionally with having lost so many members and not sure how to get them back. And some have died. Some of members that they've loved have died from COVID or suffered through it. And I know everyone in the nation has a sense of this, but pastors especially, because we're people pleasers by nature, and there's no way we can please people right now. There's too many different ideas, mask or no mask, vaccination or no vaccination, and so it has affected the pastors. Some of them are retiring, some of them are just getting out of ministry.
And according to church growth expert Tom Rayner, 90% of those watching live stream services at the beginning of the pandemic have dropped off.
So now they're not attending church, and they're not watching Facebook. Now they may be catching one of the TV pastors, but we don't know.
Hardaway worries that those who choose not to attend in person may be in danger of losing other, even more important Christian disciplines.
Like prayer and reading the scriptures and fasting or whatever disciplines you're doing. So I would say it's important to be around other Christians who are facing the same things that you're facing. It just doesn't happen if you stay home.
As for the future, Hardaway believes the smaller church will continue to appeal to those who want to be close, intimate, and known. And perhaps as people start to emerge and reconnect after months of COVID isolation, they'll be looking for that smaller congregation to call their church home. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back with more Christian World News after this. It is Super Bowl weekend, and one ministry is using the big game to highlight outstanding character and leadership in sports. The annual Super Bowl breakfast features the presentation of the Bart Starr Award. CBN's Charlene Aaron recently spoke with last year's winner, Demario Davis, about his faith.
The annual Super Bowl breakfast is where faith and football meet. Sponsored by Athletes in Action, the outreach has taken place each year since 1988, drawing sellout crowds to hear some of the sports' biggest names. Names like Demario Davis of the New Orleans Saints, known for his faith as well as big plays on the field.
Ever since we came in the league, we learned about the Super Bowl breakfast and saw that it wasn't just about the game, but it reflected a life of faith, a life of family, and of football.
Highlights of the outreach include messages of hope, complete with a presentation of the gospel. Davis, a 10-year NFL veteran and all-pro linebacker, received last year's Bart Starr Award.
It's a huge honor and a privilege just to be celebrated, by my peers, my coaches, and so many that are critical and such a heavy part of the game. So to receive those accolades means a lot. But I think for me, it's all just reflective of the kingdom, and everything that I do is about being a light for the kingdom. I just want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant.
Davis's wife, Tamala, says her husband's faith inspires her and their family.
One of the things that I just admire is how I constantly just see him seeking God, not just for one thing, but, in every area of his life, for how he's going out on the mission field, for how he strives to serve our family. Every day I watch him get up and read his Bible.
In 2019, Davis saw the cost of his faith when the NFL fined him $7,000 for wearing a headband that said "Man of God" under his helmet. While the NFL eventually backed down, public support for Davis helped create a Man of God movement. Using the publicity, he sold Man of God headbands to raise money for a local hospital. Davis felt it was important to handle the incident in a way that honored God.
I didn't want it to be a situation where I wanted to be breaking the rules because the word tells us to submit to authority. But at the same time, I didn't want it to seem as I was hiding and I was just going to bow down to the league policy and be ashamed of my faith.
A faith this lineman attempts to live out every season.
When you just trust God and you lean into him, he'll make everything else work out the way that it's supposed to. That doesn't always mean it's going to be hunky-dory and it's always going to work out nice. And you're always going to have, this amazing, award-winning, type of thing happen. But it just means it's going to work out in your favor in the end.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
So inspiring. Thanks, Charlene. And you can watch the 1-hour Super Bowl breakfast featuring the Bart Starr Award on the CBN News Channel and the CBN News app Saturday and Sunday. Visit cbnnews.com to find the times. Thanks so much for being with us. Until next week, from all of us here, goodbye and God bless you.